So you want a Chinese Type 56 semi-auto, but you can't or won't pay pre-ban prices. So you want to get a MAK-90 or similar and convert it. Is it worthwhile? Hi, Misha here, and had this actually somewhat unique post-ban Chinese come in, and it seemed like a great way to talk about the pros and cons, the costs associated with converting one of these. Or should you just leave it as is? And I know if I don't do an AK video at least once a week, everyone gets restless, so why not do one on Chinese, which is a lot of people's favorites, because up until the Romanian guns finally surpassed them in the 21st century, Chinese AKs were by far the most prevalent and perhaps most interesting imports we had. So with that, we're going to dive in, talk about converting it, and actually why this particular gun is a little unique. And before we do that, as always, if you could, you know the drill, like, share, subscribe. Like to help us out, check out the link to Patreon. At first glance, this appears to be a typical MAK-90 modified AK model of 1990. This was the Bush era assault rifle import ban from 1989 compliant version, which was introduced in late 1990. But when we take a closer look, we find some somewhat interesting features. For one, this appears to be a Jing-An manufactured gun. We had Jing-An guns in the 80s. I think Golden State was the primary importer of those. But in this era, it's import marked CJA, which stands for China Jing-An. That's the U.S. company. The Jing-An company itself was actually founded in 1984 to be an import-export agency based out of Beijing, drawing from various government arsenals. But of course, this is marked Norinco because they and Polytech were the two agents that exported guns out of China. So you could get a Norinco and it could be made at factory 366, which is usually just 66 on the gun, factory 416, factory 386, so on and so forth. Those are the state factory codes. And Jing-An was known for producing guns for the military police, some special forces, and a lot for export, including a number that were pretty much unmarked. We see this with the Chinese SKSs too. If they wanted to give or sell guns to a conflict area and didn't want them directly traced back to China, yeah, they would do that. Now, of course, for import, these have to be marked, but something that's a little unique to these, the way they're marked in front of the mag well on the underside. Very unobtrusive, especially if you get a pre-ban one. We got a few other markings on the side. Otherwise, we have a pretty standard blued finish. A few serialized parts, not many. And a nicely made gun. Basic specs. This is a 1.5 millimeter stamped receiver. It has a unique front trunnion, neither AKM nor RPK. It's Chinese, including the unique rib pattern. Smooth top cover, again standard. 800 meter type rear sight. Ported gas tube. Slab handguard. We have a 16¼ inch cold hammer forged chrome lined barrel. This one has an enclosed hooded front sight. Of course, it's chambered for 7.62 by 39, and it feeds from Kalashnikov pattern magazines. So, we see the post-ban version here. What would this be best converted into? So if you pick one of these up, What can you make it look like? Well, our best bet is this. Yes, I do like the 56 spiker look. It's very Chinese to me. But the real reason is up here on the barrel. This actually had, at one time, the assembly for the unique underfolding pig sticker spike bayonet. For import reasons, it was machined off. So you would need to replace this, but the good news is the barrel's already cut for it, so putting one back on is pretty straightforward if you want to do that. I'm sure most of you know, but the 89 ban, it outright banned some guns by name, including the original import Chinese AKs. We had the AKS or AK-47S, those were some names. They also called them 56S, yada yada. Change the name. Okay, fine. MAK-90. It also banned features. Quite apparent. The stock. This is where the thumbhole stock comes from. Specifically, it's this evil wood pistol grip they don't like. Bayonets? Nope. Can't have those. Also, threaded barrels with flash riders? Can't have those. So that's why it's a smooth barrel. Can't have a folding stock, but that's not relevant here. Interestingly, magazines. That's not something that the 89 ban focused on. It actually would not be until early 1998 that a 10-round restriction would be added for the whole being sporter classification. So we're not really concerned about that here because in April of 1994, all Chinese rifled bore guns were banned. In fact, I say that specifically because smoothbore are still permitted, and the Jing-An company, at least up until the last few years, and probably even today, has exported other guns, including Biden's favorite. Combat shotgun from Doom 2. That's right, the Coach gun has been exported, marketed by Jing-An, as far as I know, up till today. But does this mean the Biden-Chinese connection is confirmed? That's why he said all those years ago about all you need is a double-barrel shotgun. He has interest in the he's just trying to promote Chinese shotgun sales. I figured you out, Joe. Alrighty, having a little fun. But want to make this look like this. So the magazine, that's easy. We can just swap them out. The receivers, the mag wells are the same. So standard double stack military spec. So yeah. Now the MAK-90s would sometimes ship with 30-round mags, but more often you'd see them ship with 3 short 5-round mags. And yes, I know the one I had in it's not a Chinese one, but this is the one I had close to hand. But they would easily accept any standard 30-rounder, 40-rounder, or even drum. And this is a Chinese flatback mag on this one. So nothing needs doing there. Receivers, yeah, unchanged, ironically. Same goes for the sights, the bolts, the handguards, unchanged. This takes standard type handguards, standard gas tube. But then we come to the barrel. We already talked about how the bayonet assembly had to be replaced. But the muzzle, it's more problematic. And we come to one of the first, why did they do that questions. Okay, you could not have a threaded barrel, exposed threads. One way, early on especially, they got around this, including with some MAK-90s, they would simply take a muzzle nut or equivalent and tack weld it on. This is like on that recent video we looked at the Egyptian ARM I showed you. And we see the same thing. Other countries, other production lines like the Romanian SAR-1, they just never threaded the barrels to begin with. They just new production barrel, never thread it, put it on the gun. This is actually great because you can always thread them. It would have actually been really nice on a Chinese gun, especially if we're going for a PLA Type 56 clone, because while the export models like this one have threaded barrels, a lot of the ones that we see in the hands of Chinese military had bare muzzles. They never threaded them. Can't really blame them, because the threads weren't really useful early on with the original AK-47s, except for maybe a blank fire device. So China just didn't thread them. So if this was just that, it'd be fine. Unfortunately, what they did, they took a standard export barrel that had the 14 millimeter threads, and they shaved them off. And the problem with that, and I just grabbed the first free 14 mil device I had. It happens to be a PSL muzzle brake, but notice it goes right on. So the diameter is smaller, and the wall is actually quite thin. Some people will go ahead and thread it a smaller pitch. You can do that, but you're making your muzzle that much more vulnerable. Of course, you could always sleeve things, pin it on. In fact, another issue, the front sight here, the front sight base, has a spring-loaded detent. This front sight base is just solid, no hole in it. So it is, ironically, a special-made front sight base. Also notice, of course, this one has the part for the bayonet on it. This one's been machined off. Even if it's the type that took the detaching bayonet, they would machine off the bottom of the base too. So, long story short, you're probably going to replace your front sight base anyway to get your cleaning rod front retaining bracket there and get your hole for your thing. That's problematic, and that could have been gone about two other better ways.
Bug in my face immediately.
Another strange thing that not just China did, but some other exporters, I pointed it out in the FEG SA85M conversion video earlier this year, they removed the cleaning rod. And they didn't just remove it, they removed the brackets under the gas block for it as well. So you'd need to replace your gas block. Even if you didn't do that, there's a hole in the handguard retainer that's not here on the MAK-90. So you'd either have to drill a hole or replace the handguard retainer as well. They really didn't want you having a cleaning rod. Why? Why was this considered an evil feature? Obviously the band said, I think, had it just been, they thought it looked military to have a steel rod under the barrel. The way to make it look more sporting, no cleaning rod. But yeah, if you want a cleaning rod, you need to modify or replace this. You need to replace your gas block. You need to replace your front sight base. Do something about the muzzle. And if you want a bayonet on this version, you'll replace this with this. You can re-weld, but that's more effort and time unless you're a good welder yourself. If you are, I salute you. I can't weld for shit. I wonder why. Another thing, cleaning rod bed, okay, but this still has full sling mounts. You'd think on this side and on the stock. Now the one on the stock is more of a sporter style, kind of screwed in. I've seen some that don't have it, do have it, doesn't matter. Could have been added by the owner, I don't know, but this one has it. And I've seen other direct imports that definitely had it. Rubber recoil pad. Thumbhole stock, very beefy, all kinds of types of these. Some are good, some are horrible. But yeah, you'll see slings on at least some of these. Others you don't. It's kind of intermittent. But a rear swivel is easy to add because it has the front. And all I've ever seen do have the front swivel. I find it odd that the cleaning rod, no, can't have it. Can't have even the brackets for it. But we'll have the swivel. I mean, okay, whatever. So that gets us to the front. I mean, it's up to you. mag well's good. And we should just be able to pull this thumb hole stock off and put on a pistol grip and buttstock, right? And the truth is, yes, sometimes. However, always check, because, well, it's not always the case. Sometimes when you unscrew the stock, you discover this. Rather than a traditional quote-unquote square back receiver, you get a slant back or slant cut receiver. Now you can't look at the side of the stock and say, well, if it's got this angle, it's a slant cut. If it doesn't, it's square, because the difference is actually inside the stock. This little nub in here, the outside's always kind of curvy like that. These are actually held on with 2 screws, but not the ones you might think. We have the rear screw here, but no front screw. Instead, we actually use the hole for the pistol grip and the nut. Anyone who noticed why there wasn't a screw in that earlier in the video, I salute you for being observant. I'd already kind of pre-loosened these so I could make sure I could pull it off easily. Sometimes these old stocks will kind of swell and be hard to remove. This one came right off. Now, of course, you could drill a 3rd screw hole, because it does have top and bottom in the rear here. Also has a very unique rear trunnion. So why did they do this? Is it a way to keep you from putting on a standard stock? No, not really. A normal stock will fit right on. Lines up fine at the top. The screw hole even lines up fine. And like I said, it does have the 2nd screw hole in the top if it's unused on the trunnion, so you can put both screws in. The only thing is you have this visual gap here. Now the stock does go deep enough into the receiver that honestly it's enough supported. It's just maybe cosmetically unattractive. Now what you could do is cut a piece of steel and shim it in there. Wrap it around. There are ways. And a standard pistol grip like this over here will fit just fine. There's a reasonably appropriate looking wood grip. It uses the same screw and nut as usual, so putting a pistol grip on is absolutely straightforward. So the only problem with this style of receiver is just that visual gap, frankly. Why did they do it? Well, the answer is actually pretty self-evident, and actually even kind of ties into the Jing-An factory a bit. Time to bring out the 56S-1 again, the underfolding. Do you see it? Maybe this will help if you don't. Let's pull the stock off again and fold this stock up. Now I think you do. The angle, it's the same. All they did is they installed a different trunnion back here, and they gave it this rivet pattern versus this rivet pattern. Chinese underfolding receivers are interesting. They aren't like a milled where it's a single piece, and they're different from an AKMS. Basically, it's a standard 1.5 receiver with a end plate. Not even a really a, like it is a trunnion, but kind of not, put on the back here. And we have 2 rivets, but they're very close together. Right there. And so this receiver, when it was made originally, the stamping was intended for an underfolding stock. That's the reason. When it comes to stamped receiver MAK-90s like this, some were square back, some were slant cut. But the milled MAK-90s that were imported back in '93, as far as I know, all of those were actually slant cut like this. And that makes sense because Golden State slash the Jing-An brought over quite a few underfolders in the preban era. And since we have this kind of leftover bayonet spiker, this could have been a double underfolder. Something not used by the PLA, but something exported by China quite a bit, which just further backs up the whole Jing-An being an export for other militaries company. So that's the reasoning there for the interesting receiver type. Some would consider a slant cut kind of the death knell. I don't, because you can actually make these into underfolders. You have to change the rivets. Now some MAK-90s actually came in with the holes for the underfolding stock there, and you could just install the stock. Again, there's no rules with the MAK-90s. Dozens of companies imported these. More than one company exported these from China, and they were made at least half a dozen state factories, state arsenals, over a 3+ year production run. And they brought over hundreds of thousands. So, yeah, I've seen interesting MAK-90s that have the underfolding stock that was installed by the user here, but then have the complete kind of neutered forend. In fact, this gun up here of mine, as you know, I'm sure, is actually a 156S-1, which was one of the Cotton Customs guns that were on the way or here but not approved yet when the ban came down in March of '89. And so for it, what they actually did, they folded the stock up and they installed a thumbhole stock, and they just very sloppily put it on, and they machined off the sides of the bayonet lug. And this is one, you can see the leftover tack weld here, that just to comply with the barrel threads thing, they just tack welded on a muzzle device. And luckily they did actually leave the freaking cleaning rod intact. I've had this gun for many years, and I've gotten a lot of mileage out of it. It comes up in a lot of videos, but it's a good example point. I kind of love it. And it was a really good price because it was just sold as a weird gun. The owner thought someone had monkeyed with it here, taking off the lug, so he knocked the price down. He's not wrong. It was just the importer that did it to comply with the new rules. So there were the transitional guns, which are not MAK-90s. MAK-90s were actually built, strictly speaking, after the ban. They're not transitional. Although they could be built with pre-ban or other parts like the lug here, this receiver. And a lot of them were actually electro pin engraved versus, neatly stamped. No rules though. Although they will have a blued finish. They didn't do phosphating or painting. And the bolt carriers can either be in the white or less common blued. So, I think that's it. All the things you may or may not have to do. So we come to the end and we come to the question, is it worth converting? Should you do it? To maybe answer that, and again, this is subjective. This is just my opinion. Please keep that in mind. Let's approach it from 3 or 4 directions. Collectability, cost, effort, and shootability, range time. Is it worth it? Beginning with collectability, and this is just my opinion, and I'll probably be proven wrong. This will be one of those things 10 years people say, see, he was wrong. It happens. I'm married, I'm used to being wrong. I don't think guns that were explicitly made, and usually hastily so, just to comply with an asinine rule, be it the '89 import ban or the '94 assault weapons ban, I don't think that like thumbhole stock, neutered barrel thing will ever really be collectible in and of itself. Like if you have a nicely converted MAK-90 into something like this or the previous gun versus one left stock, I think most people would prefer the nicely converted one. But there's always the oddball. who wants something completely original as kind of a snapshot in time piece of history. That's great if you didn't live through it, but for a lot of us who did, we have an instinctual aversion to butthole stocks. We gotta take them off. It's a compulsion. We had to live through this crap, and one of the things we all did when this was been sunset at the end of 04 was convert guns, because we could. So that's my experience and why I say it. But I do think a good conversion will be worthwhile. But I say that very qualified good conversion. A, you want to use original correct parts or US made replicas that are as correct spec as possible. For example, a US made spiker assembly is fine if it looks right. And if you wanted to make this an underfolder, try to use the Chinese style underfolding stock. And not just because of aesthetics, but also it'll fit right. If you try to put an AKMS stock on here, it won't quite fit right. You can probably make it work, but it won't quite fit right or look right. And the second half of that is who does the work? Is it a gunsmith? Okay, if he's a qualified AK gunsmith, awesome. Some of those guys have better work than factories. But if he's just, your hometown gunsmith who's used to working on Remingtons and things like that, he might be awesome working on hunting guns. He may know shit all about AKs. Or if you do it in your own garage, what do you know? And you might, again, be an expert. Awesome if you are. But if you're learning, think about it. If you go to buy a used car and it has had work done on it, as most used cars have, and someone says, yeah, I took it in to the factory and the guys there worked on it, cool. If he says, well, I was having troubles, but I fixed it in my own garage, that might give you pause, at least until you get ascertained if the guy working on it in his own garage knew what the hell he was doing. Guns are kind of similar, so be mindful of the work you have done. Don't get in a hurry, find the right parts, do the work to the best of your ability, because a lot of this stuff, you only get one shot out of it, like drilling rivet holes or, cutting a barrel if it's a virgin barrel. But at the end of the day, what people really want these for is the Chinese receiver and the Chinese barrel, because you can't really get those anymore. So collectability wise, if you convert it well, and don't go too deep. That's another mistake I've seen people make. They'll buy a MAK-90, and by the time they pay for the parts for conversion and someone to do the conversion, they spent enough money, they could have just waited around and looked for a decent deal on a preban. Or maybe a transitional gun like this one. I wasn't just chomping at the bit to get an underfolder. They're not my favorite style. So I wasn't really wanting to pay pre-ban prices for one, but when this transitional gun came along, it hit the bill. It was a little cheaper, and it has all the features except the bayonet, lug, wings, so cool by that. And I could always re-add them. So keep your costs in mind. Now, if you've got a good deal on a MAK-90, great. But these days, prices on these are going up, so please do keep that in mind. And also keep in mind that Chinese parts are unique. A Type 56 is not an AK-47. And a Type 56 is not an AKM. What is it? It's a Type 56. Let's move on. Shootability, range time, practical things. Maybe you're not a collector. Maybe you never sell your guns. Okay, fine. But you still care about how it performs. Well, the changes we've talked about are almost all cosmetic. It's cool to have your bayonet back, or your cleaning rod, but the truth is, manipulating your barrel, hanging more stuff off of it, actually could slightly decrease accuracy. Again, it's an AK. Their inaccuracy is often overstated, but at the same time, this is not going to be a 1 MOA gun, mostly because it's limited by the 7.62x39 cartridge and the ammo we usually have. But yeah, you go monkeying around with the barrel, swapping this out, that out, hammering on it, you could mess that up. So if anything, working on the barrel could potentially mess your accuracy up. Probably won't, but hey, we're just talking possibilities. Now, figuring out a way to thread it or have a removable device, that's one thing. I think what I would do personally with these cut-off thread guns, I would just permanently attach a muzzle brake or whatever you want. A slant brake, a muzzle nut, just to cover this up because it does look so skinny. And I actually do like muzzle brakes, especially with 760x39 guns. Just having that little bit of recoil check is kind of nice. Cleaning rod, it has no practical value, but it looks right on an AK. And that's where I kind of ended up with that Hungarian conversion. I wasn't going to do all I did with it, but I wasn't going to be happy. But that's just me. That's a me problem. Moving back, luckily this takes standard mags, so that's one of the big pluses of the early era in imports, the 90 to 97 era in general, the 90 to 94 Chinese. You don't have to convert the mag well. Converting a mag well can be done very quick and easy, but it can also be screwed up, and again, you only get one shot at it. So the fact that these have factory mag wells, great. Moving back here, trigger grip's fine. Usually these have double hook triggers. The stock. Again, all butthole stocks are not created equal. Some are reasonably comfortable. Some almost look nice. Some have a longer length of pull. A lot of people do find in America the original Warsaw length is short for them. So some thumbhole stocks, like this has the pad on it, are effectively longer. So that actually might be a plus. On the other hand, usually this pistol grip on these is very chunky. This one's reasonably rounded. Some of them are just square. They do look stupid though. So you pull it off, you put a stock and a grip on. That could improve your shooting comfort. But again, we've already talked about slant back versus square back. That's usually a Chinese problem. The Hungarian guns, the Egyptian guns are all square back. Off the top of my head, I'm sure there's others, but off the top of my head, the only other company I can think of that exported kind of weirdly cut back guns were from Huger, Romania, between 97 and 99. Some of the Romania imports would have a circle cut in the back. Ironically, whereas the Chinese just did it because of underfolding receivers, Romania actually did do it for compliance reasons. They didn't need to, but it was early days and they didn't really know what they could and couldn't get away with. Kind of like doing business on YouTube, frankly. We never know what it will and won't permit, so we err on the side of caution most of the time. So yeah, if you get one, check it if you can. Unfortunately, externally, there's not always a good way to look. If you see a milled MAK-90, it is slant cut. I wouldn't worry about it. It's still a milled receiver. Milled receivers are quite cool. But yeah, be mindful of that. But if you're just a shooter, frankly, you can just get a MAK-90 and leave it as is. It's a very good quality Kalashnikov. It is factory built. I do think the prebans were a little higher quality. Not so much because of the ban itself, but because of the numbers. In the preban era, there were fewer importers. These came in smaller numbers. China seemed to give more of a shit, frankly. The ban in 89 really disgusted a lot of overseas people, and they figured, why should we put a lot of time and effort into guns going to America if they could just get banned again? So that plus more importers, higher numbers. The MAK-90 is kind of variable in its quality. Some seem as high quality as a pre-ban. Others are a little rough. They always run. Well, almost always. But sometimes the triggers are kind of or the bolts are kind of sloppy in their travel, or you get like wiggly top cover. This one's nice and tight. Or sometimes you get wiggly handguards, which got a little play on this one. This one up here has more. I actually put a little electrical tape to tighten it up. Little things like that that you did not typically find on pre-bans, but no big deal. Now, one thing I will say that's always kind of about the Chinese guns, and it's mostly because I live in the south in a humid region, this blued finish, it looks pretty good, but it's not especially great at preventing rust, kind of freckling corrosion. You can usually just wipe it off, but if you own a Chinese gun, I would encourage you to visit it frequently, and even then, you're going to get rust, or at least little surface things. There's probably some on mine. Oh well, it happens. And this seems to be true for the Norincos, and even more so for the Polytechs, because the Polytechs have more of a gloss finish. The metal's more polished underneath. To my mind, the Polytech guns were meant to look pretty and not so much to be as durable. I actually like the Zastava blued finish. It seems to hold up a little better. Or maybe it's the metal underneath. But either way, I don't notice this rust issue as much. Even if it's just surface rust, it just kind of wipes right off. I've noticed that with Chinese guns. And I have seen these stored in garages where they're just completely eaten up on one side where they were laying with rust. And I don't see that with Modis or FEG guns or Romanian. But hey. So yeah, if you're just a shooter, since this takes standard mags and everything, you may be happy with it the way it is or just want to add a muzzle brake, call it a day. There's obviously no direct way to mount a scope on these. Although there are top cover versions that, So, there you go. So, back to the end. Should you get a MAK-90 to convert it? On the do it side, on the positives, this is a factory-built gun. They came from different factories, but they're all, factory. They were banned in 1994, so no more going to come in. It'll be 30 years and like 6 months. So, yeah. And it takes a standard magazine, a standard cartridge. Replacement parts are reasonably available. High quality 1.5 mil stamped receiver. And a very good, although I wouldn't say the best quality barrel. I do think like FB, Radom, maybe FEG, Russia makes slightly better barrels, but that's not knocking the Chinese. Just what I've observed. So yeah, you get it's an import. So compared to like a kit build, if I really wanted a Type 56 for the collection and a preban was just out of the question, I would much rather start with this and go from there than start with a kit build on a US receiver and US barrel and go from there. Kit builds to me, they're fine, but they're kind of a last resort thing, at least ever since the barrel ban in 2005. And these are good shooters. They're as accurate, or even maybe a little better so than your average AK. Fit and finish is better than your Wasser, usually, not always, and better than your Modi, probably almost all the time. So, those are the pros. First con kind of relates to just how affordable and available these were back in the day. Anytime you buy one now, it's second, third, fourth, fifth, whatever hand. There are quote-unquote new in box examples out there, but yeah, most MAK-90s you found have been fired. And of course, everyone always says, oh, it's only had a couple of boxes of ammo through it. Even if it looks like crap. That's like the seller, the used seller's line. It's like the used car dealer gun version is, oh, only a couple of boxes of ammo have run through it. Okie dokie. No, you have to just kind of judge it on its condition. Now, some people took really good care of these. This one's in really good shape. The bore looks good and sides are very clean. However, some people didn't. Some people bought these as work guns, even hunting guns. Some people left them in their garage. I know lots of people that have farms around here that use these as kind of their farm gun. And that combined with that blued finish, yeah, rust, corrosion. Luckily, the bore is chrome lined, so usually the barrels held out better than the externals. But corrosive ammo, mostly Chinese, has been around, and some people used it, and some people didn't really understand the whole cleaning corrosive. Even if they did. Again, living in the humid South, I've thought I've cleaned well enough with corrosive, only to realize later I didn't. Once years ago, Jay had cleaned his gun quite well, and the ammo was supposed to be non-corrosive. But he found, like, under the handguard from the gas ports on the tube, stuff had blown in, and there had been a corrosive primer, and he had rust under his handguard on his barrel. So it does happen. So if you get one of these, know you're buying a used gun, and inspect it to just make sure. That also kind of goes with modifications. Make sure no one's drilled and tapped it for a scope mount or equivalent, Don't want that. There was even a batch of these that came in with the third trigger pin. Those are verboten. Third pin equals machine gun. They were recalled, but they do pop up from time to time. I can think of 2 or 3 I've seen here local. Avoid those. Or if you do end up with one, cut the receiver apart and use it as a parts kit. So yeah, condition, all that. Cons too. People underestimate the cost and complexity of converting. Or you'll get in and think, I'll just replace the stock. But then you look at it and the back looks great, but then the front doesn't. So I'm going to replace this. And then you realize you have to modify multiple pieces or find different pieces. Then you also realize that the diameter of the Chinese barrel is different than like an AKM, so you need specific parts, and it goes on from there and there and there. And it snowballs. I've seen that happen to more than a few people. Be aware. Now, back in the day when you could still pick up a nice MAK-90 for $500, $600, it was reasonable, plus parts were cheaper back then. But today, a nice MAK-90 is $1,000, or close enough to it, it doesn't matter. And the parts could easily run up to $500, especially if you want a spiker, even more. And then a gunsmith, any more gunsmiths charge several $100s. Might need to get it reblued. I would recommend not doing that if you could help it, but you might have to. You could easily end up with $2,000 in one of these. And it's still a converted post-ban gun. Nothing you can do will ever make it a pre-ban. And at that time, you can realize that, pre-bans, yeah, they're harder to find, they're more expensive, but they're not as rare as you think. Yeah, there are, hundreds of thousands of post-bans, but there are still at least a couple of 100,000 pre-bans in the country, different variants and different types. But if you look around, you can usually, even today, find a pre-ban for under 3,000, sometimes even under 2,500, sometimes if it's a local deal, close to 2,000. I would say if it's a converted MAK-90 for $2,000 or a true pre-ban for 2,500, spend a little more for the pre-ban. It'll be a better investment, and it's a factory-done gun. Just saying. Personal opinion there. But I think I'm kind of right on this. The pre-bans, actually the underfolders and the removable bayonet versions seem to go for a little cheaper. The spikers go for a bit more, and the milds go for more than that. And then you get into like the side folders, they go for even more. And then there's all kinds of weird rare ones. So yeah, be mindful of your budget and what you're doing, frankly. And that leads me to a question. Why do you want a Chinese Type 56? I know that might seem odd, but this is actually something I've had quite a few conversations with customers with recently. Guys getting into AKs, they'll call me. I'm happy to tell them what I think. I can't tell them for sure much, but I can tell them what I think. And if you're just wanting one because you want a Chinese Type 56 for the collection, like I did with this one, awesome. It's a unique pattern. Get it. But a lot of guys today have heard that the Chinese AKs were the best. This is patently false. This is patently bad information. And it's funny because years ago, they were considered the worst. A couple of years back, I did a video, Chinese AK like junk to gold. It's still true today, although I'm starting to see that the opinion is starting to kind of average out. And why do I say that? Well, what are the reasons for saying the Chinese AK is the best? Well, it's built in a military factory. True. So are a lot of other imports. Arsenal, Huger, Zastava, FEG, MADA. So while that's a good thing, it's not a unique thing. Next, they'll say, well, it's got a cold hammer forged chrome line barrel. Again, it's a good thing. Those other guns do as well, except for the Zastavas until the Z-Paps started doing it. Next, they'll say it's got a 1.5 mil receiver. Actually, they usually call it a 1.6 mil just to make it sound that little bit more. Truthfully, the specs are 1.4 to 1.6 mil, so 1.5 is the medium. True. But, as I tell people, how often do you hear of a 1.0 mil stamped receiver failing? You don't. It's not a failure point. Otherwise, Russia would not have made the AKM with it. Even if you do want the 1.5, that's fine, but other guns have it as well. There were those SSR 85 imports out of Bulgaria that had it. Zastavas have it. Vepers have it. It's not unique to China. And it has the Chinese front trunnion, which is actually thinner and lighter than the one found on an RPK, like a Veper. It's not a bulged. And most of your Zastavas have the bulged front trunnion. So I would actually argue that the 1.5 millimeter receiver from Zastava overall is, if you're just wanting like beefcakes, slightly more durable. Yeah. Again, it's not really a failure point though, if I'm being honest, on any of these guns. So it's kind of something that doesn't really matter. Another thing they point out, well, they have a standard magwell. Again, very true, but many other guns as well. And also, it's okay to convert a post 97 gun from 10 round to 30 or whatever. Now, it can be done poorly, but it can also be done very, very cleanly. Look at the guns that come out of Poland today, imported by Arms of America. That work is done precisely using a jig. I know because they sent me one of their jigs. You just put it on, use a CNC, boop, there you go. It's not a problem. The same with the modern Zastava imports. I would also say that not all guns have the slim single stack magwell. Some have a standard double stack magwell, but the way they restricted to 10 rounds is they don't have a bullet guide. So you see this a lot with like Vepers and Segas. They just had to rivet in or screw in a bullet guide at the chamber and you're good to go. So people I see make a much bigger deal out of that alteration than it needs to be. Again, if it's done poorly, I agreed. It's not great. But if it's done correctly, it's as good as anything else, frankly. Another con, 922R. You're supposed to put no more than 10 foreign-made parts out of a list of 20. The AK stamped has 16 parts. The AK milled has 15. So you're supposed to put some US parts in it. Fuck that, no one cares. But if you're selling one, I would say go ahead and do that. Why not? Easy ones to do for one of these. Actually, this only needs 5 because you don't have a removable muzzle device. So this only needs 5 anyway. Easy one to do. And if it's in the thumb hole stock configuration, it's fine. It's considered sporting. But if you do convert it and want to sell it, I don't know, US pistol grip and US trigger group, that counts as 3. And then maybe a US buttstock. Or you could just do the US magazine option, that counts for 3. Really, a trigger and a magazine would get you there. And what's nice about doing those as 922R parts versus, say, a gas piston is it's easily reversible. Not that we never would do that, but good God. I promise you one thing. The internet cares more about this whole issue than anyone in the US government, because it's... Anyway, moving on before I say something. That's the thing about... Trust me, if me and you were just chatting in person, I'd have a lot more to say. But I've got to monitor what I say. But I'll just say that 922R is nothing to worry about, frankly, one way or the other. So we come to the end. Like I said at the beginning, if you could, please do like, share, and subscribe. And if you'd like to help us out, go over and check out the link on Patreon and the Q&As and stuff. We're doing one of those right now for July. We often talk Kalashnikovs. So let me ask you a question for the comments, and please post. Hypothetically, if you were considering getting a MAK-90, after listening to this video, what do you think? Would you, A, just get a preban, even if it costs more money and takes a little more time? B, get a MAK-90 and convert it? Or C, get a MAK-90 and just enjoy it the way it is? Or maybe just do a very simple conversion, like if it's a square back receiver or even slant, putting on a pistol grip stock and calling it a day. For my interest, obviously preban's the way I could go, but I'm also fortunate enough to have been collecting these guns back at a time when the prebans were not god-awful expensive. There were more, But for example, I remember going to gun shows, seeing in the box, styrofoam box, all the mags, Polytech Legends for around $900 to $1,000. Yeah, more than they were, more than double the price before the ban, but still not bad. In fact, I think this gun I have 1,700 in. This gun I have, because it's a transitional, maybe 11 or 12. Either way. So I recognize that. But if I were a young Gen Zer or Gen Zer for our Canadian friends, and MAK-90 was just, let's just say I got one, I think I would just enjoy it as it is, just replacing the thumbhole stock. I had to put on a nice wood pistol grip and buttstock that matched the handguards. We're already taking standard mags. And I think I would just leave the barrel alone. And I think I would enjoy that until I could get a pre-ban. I think I would just have that as my Chinese example piece. And, make that my learner until I can trade it off for more than I had in it and put that money towards a pre-ban. Now, I say that with these. Now, there are exceptions to this. For example, my Arsenal SA-93. I converted it because there are no other options. There are no pre-ban Arsenals. And it's a milled receiver. A little bit more special there. And I would agree, too, if you get a MAK-90 that's on a milled receiver, that's a little more of interest because it is a little bit special. But neither here nor there. So there are some cases when conversion is really your only option. But that's just my opinion. I'd love to hear yours below. I know people like AKs. I know the MAK-90 is a big topic. This one came in the store. It being a Jing-An import, or a CJA import from the Jing-An. It's a little bit different, as much as MAK-90 can be unique. And there are other variants. We've looked at the NHM 90s and 91s, the MAK-91s. There are the 223 variants, the 92s. But either way, these came to a hard stop in 1994 when sanctions were placed on China because of international trafficking in ports and so on and so forth, which was only a few months before the whole federal assault weapons ban came down in September of 94. Fun fact, before we leave, the assault weapons ban in September of 94 really did not affect imports because they had been under just as tight, if not even tighter restrictions since March of 1989. But of course it impacted how we could convert them here, and it impacted domestic manufacturing. So usually when I think of the 94 situation, I think of, AR-15s because it impacted those more. But that's getting a bit off topic. But this is me we're talking about, so of course we are. But yeah, appreciate you tuning in. This is Misha, and we'll catch you very soon next time.